Okay, let's unpack something that feels a little bit like a cheat code for your brain. I want to start with a question about how we consume stories. Is there a fundamental difference, like a literal rewiring of the experience between reading words on a page and having a story told to you? And I don't just mean, is it easier or is it faster? I mean, does the actual message of the story change when it enters through your ears instead of your eyes?
As a fascinating premise to start with, we tend to think of audiobooks as a secondary medium, right?
A convenience.
Exactly. It's what you do when you're washing dishes or stuck in traffic. But there's a really strong argument that certain stories, by their very design, are actually suppressed by the printed page and liberated by the spoken word.
Wow. Liberated by audio. That is a bold claim. And the case study we're looking at today is, well, it's the big one, the grandfather of modern fantasy. We are doing a deep dive into the Lord of the Rings audiobook experience. And before you roll your eyes and think, I know the plot, I saw the movies, just hold on. Because this isn't a review of the plot. This is an analysis of how the medium of audio changes the entire texture of Middle-earth.
Exactly. And the materials we're looking at describe the experience not as reading a novel, but as being carried through an ancient legend by a storyteller beside a fire.
Which sounds incredibly cozy, I have to admit. But let's be real, is that just marketing fluff? Or is there actually something structural in the book that supports that?
It's surprisingly technical. I mean, you have to remember who J.R.R. Tolkien was. He wasn't a novelist in the modern sense. He didn't go to workshops on show, don't tell. He was a philologist.
The philologist. Okay, break that down for the people in the back.
He studied the history of language. Specifically, he was obsessed with ancient dead languages, Old English, Old Norse, the stuff of Beowulf and the Eddas.
The really epic stuff.
Right. And the key thing about those myths is that they were oral traditions. They were never meant to be read silently in a chair. They were meant to be spoken aloud in a mead hall. They relied on alliteration, rhythm, and meter to be remembered.
So when Tolkien sat down to write The Lord of the Rings, he wasn't just writing modern prose. He was trying to mimic that ancient spoken style.
Precisely. And this explains the #1 complaint modern readers have about the books.
Oh, I know this complaint. I have lived this complaint. The density. You're reading along, having a great time, and suddenly you hit a 3-page description of a hill.
Or the lineage of a tree.
Yes. Or the exact direction the wind is blowing. And on the page, it feels heavy. It feels like homework.
It feels like data. When you read with your eyes, your brain is actively processing symbols, decoding descriptions, trying to build the image yourself. It's high friction. But here's the magic trick. When you switch to audio, that heaviness transforms. It stops being too much detail and starts becoming atmosphere.
Can you give me a specific example of how that shift happens?
Yeah.
How does a boring description become atmosphere just because someone says it?
Okay, think about the descriptions of nature. On the page, you might skim over the adjectives describing a forest. But in the audiobook, the narrator controls the pacing. When they read the description of the old forest or the mines of Moria, they slow down. They drop their pitch. Suddenly, the forests feel ancient and watchful. The mountains feel cold and vast. You aren't analyzing the text. You are inhabiting the environment.
That makes so much sense. It's the difference between looking at a sheet music score and hearing the symphony played. The narrator does the heavy lifting of visualization for you.
Exactly. And this leads to the biggest aha moment for anyone who has tried and failed to read the books textually. We have to talk about the poetry.
Oh, man. The songs. I have to be honest here. I consider myself a pretty dedicated reader. But when I'm reading The Fellowship of the Ring and I see a block of italicized lyrics indented on the page, my eyes just glaze over. I skip it. I say, okay, Tom Bombadil is singing about his boots again. Moving on.
You are not alone. It's the universal skim tax of reading Tolkien. Here is a lament for a dead king, skip. Here is a song about bathwater, skip. But in the audiobook, you can't skip.
Well, you could hit the fast forward button 15 seconds at a time, but that's a hassle.
Right, but you don't want to. That's the surprise. When these poems are performed, they stop being interruptions to the plot and start feeling purposeful. You realize that in an oral culture, history is kept in song. When Aragorn sings the lay of Beren and Luthien, it's not just a break in the action, it's him connecting himself to his ancestors. It provides a cultural texture that you completely miss if you skim the text.
So it shifts your role. You aren't an editor deciding what's important. You're a participant. You're stuck at the campfire, so you have to listen to the song.
And that stuckness creates immersion. You start to feel the rhythm of the world.
Okay, so we've established that audio might be the native format for Middle-earth. But now we have a problem. Because there isn't just one version of this audio experience. We have a bit of a battle of the five armies situation going on between two very different narrators.
We do. And this is where the debate gets heated in the fan community. You essentially have two distinct flavors of Middle-earth available to you.
Let's break them down. In the blue corner, we have the classic, Rob Inglis. And in the red corner, the modern challenger, Andy Serkis.
Rob Inglis recorded his version in the early 90s. He was a quintessential stage actor, practically a one-man theater company. His approach is very much that of a historian.
A historian.
Yes. Listening to Inglis feels like your grandfather is reading to you from a very important history book in a leather armchair. It's objective, it's cozy, it has this vintage, warm quality. He doesn't try to become the characters so much as he represents them.
Right. It's safe, it's comforting. But then you have Andy Serkis. And we all know Serkis from the films. He's the guy in the motion capture suit. He is Gollum.
And that creates a completely different energy. If Inglis is a historian reading a book, Andy Serkis is an actor performing a play. It is cinematic, it is sweaty, it is intense.
Sweaty is a great way to describe it. I've heard clips where during the battle scenes, you can literally hear him running out of breath.
You can. He creates a visceral immediacy. He creates tension. But it's not just about energy levels, it's about character differentiation. The way these two men handle the voices changes how you perceive the heroes.
Let's look at the hobbits first. How do they compare?
In the English version, the hobbits are very proper. They sound a bit like English country gentlemen. But Serkis, he leans into the emotion. His hobbits sound warm, earthy, and gentle, but when they get scared, they sound genuinely terrified. He captures that frantic energy of a small person in a big, dangerous world.
And what about the big guns?
Yeah.
Gandalf and Aragorn?
This is interesting. Serkis gives Gandalf this gravelly, weary texture. You can hear the centuries of smoking pipeweed and fighting demons in his throat. It carries wisdom and controlled power, whereas Inglis's Gandalf is a bit more crisp, a bit more academic.
But we have to talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the creature in the cave. The big selling point for the Serkis version has to be Gollum, right?
It's the Serkis factor, and frankly, for many listeners, Gollum alone is worth the price of admission.
I mean, he invented the voice for the movies, so hearing it in the audiobook must be surreal.
It's more than surreal, it's psychological. The analysis we have describes his performance as chilling, emotional, and layered with madness and sorrow.
That layered part is what interests me. Because on the page, Gollum is often just a nuisance. He's slinking around, he's gross, he says precious. But hearing Serkis do it...
You hear the fracture in the mind. You hear the switch between Sméagol and Gollum in real time. The text tells you he's conflicted, but the audio shows you the conflict through the timbre of the voice. It adds a layer of empathy that is very hard to achieve in print. You aren't just disgusted by him, you're pitying him.
So if Inglis is the bedtime story version, Serkis is the psychological thriller version.
That's a fair distinction. Serkis is much more immersive, but it can also be exhausting. Because he acts out everything so intensely, you can't really zone out. Inglis lets you drift a bit. Serkis demands your attention.
Speaking of exhaustion, we need to talk about the sheer scale of this thing. Because regardless of which narrator you choose, you are signing up for a massive commitment.
It is significant.
We are talking over 50 hours for the trilogy. That's a part-time job. That is a solid week of work.
It's a mountain to climb.
So honestly, is the payoff worth that investment? Why not just watch the extended edition movies, which take 12 hours, and call it a day?
This brings us back to the idea of pacing. The source material argues that we need to reframe how we look at that length. We are conditioned to binge content. We want to crush a series in a weekend. But The Lord of the Rings on audio isn't content. It's a slow, meaningful relationship.
A relationship. I like that. So it's not a race to the finish line.
No. And the pacing of the narration enforces this. It respects what critics call Tolkien's deliberate speed. The story doesn't rush. It takes its time to look at the trees. It takes its time to eat breakfast.
It creates a rhythm.
Exactly. It's dynamic, it's slow and reflective during the lore-heavy moments. But then, especially in the Serkis version, it gets tense and urgent during the battles. And then, and this is crucial, it becomes quiet and almost sacred in the emotional scenes.
That dynamic range is interesting because the movies are pretty loud most of the time. Even the quiet moments in a blockbuster film have a swelling orchestra behind them.
Right. But the audiobook invites patience. It rewards the listener who is willing to surrender to the journey rather than trying to optimize it.
Surrender to the journey. That's a tough sell in 2026. We're used to 60-second TikToks.
We are, but that's exactly why it's valuable. It forces your brain to downshift. You can't speed read an audiobook. You have to move at the speed of the narrator's breath.
So if you put in those 50 hours, if you survive the journey, what's the emotional payoff? Does the story actually hit harder?
The consensus is yes. The spoken word amplifies the abstract themes and makes them personal.
Give me an example. What's a moment that lands better in your ears than on the page?
Let's look at Frodo. In the book, you read that the ring is heavy. You read that he is tired. But in the audiobook, particularly toward the end in Mordor, you hear the exhaustion in the narrator's voice. You hear the fraying of his spirit. The burden feels heavier with every mile because the voice actor is literally dragging the words out.
And
Sam's loyalty moves from a concept to something deeply moving when voiced with sincerity. There's a warmth to the spoken word that makes his devotion feel real, not just like a literary device.
the one that really stood out to me in our research was Boromir.
Yes.
In the movies, and even in the book to some extent, Boromir is the guy who messed up. He's the cautionary tale. But the analysis describes his fall in the audiobook as tragic, human, and painful.
That connects back to the voice acting adding nuance. When you hear Boromir's struggle, not just his anger, but the desperation in his voice as he talks to Frodo, he stops being a villain and starts being a tragedy. You hear the panic of a man who is trying to save his people and is being corrupted by the very thing he thinks will help him. It humanizes him in a way that text sometimes keeps at a distance.
And that leads into the bigger themes. Because at its core, this isn't a story about fighting monsters. It's about how we deal with evil.
It is, and there is one insight regarding the themes that I think is the most profound part of this entire analysis. The audio experience highlights that evil doesn't always arrive with noise, it whispers.
Evil whispers. That is such a chilling image.
Think about the cinematic version of evil. It's explosions, it's orc armies screaming, it's the Eye of Sauron roaring, it's loud. But in the book, and specifically in the audio, the true threat is quiet. It's the ring whispering to Frodo. It's Saruman's voice, which is described as melodic and persuasive, convincing you that he's actually the good guy.
So when you're listening, rather than watching, you become attuned to that subtlety. You have to listen for the corruption.
Exactly. You realize that the battle isn't just physical, it's internal. It's a battle against the quiet voice in your head telling you to give up or to take the power.
That makes the story feel incredibly personal. Because, let's be honest, most of us aren't going to fight a Balrog this week. But we all fight those whispers. We all fight that quiet corruption or that desire to take the easy way out.
Precisely. The spoken word bridges the gap between a high fantasy world and our internal reality.
And then we get to the ending. And without spoiling the specifics for the 3 people listening who don't know how it ends, the audio experience of the ending is described as melancholic.
It is. It's what Tolkien called eucatastrophe, the sudden joyous turn. But it's wrapped in discatastrophe, or sorrow. The audiobook captures the fact that victory comes with loss.
It's not a fireworks show.
No, it's a meditation on sacrifice. You hear the sadness and the farewells. It feels earned. It feels like you've actually traveled a long distance and now you're tired. It leaves you with a sense of quiet profundity rather than an adrenaline rush.
So when we look at the whole package, the atmosphere, the restoration of the oral tradition, the voice acting, the themes, what is the final verdict here?
The verdict is a 10 out of 10. But the sources don't just call it a great product, they describe it as a traveling companion.
I love that image. It's not a file on your phone, it's a companion.
It rates a 10 out of 10 for immersion, emotion, and legacy. It essentially turns the masterpiece back into what it was always meant to be, a spoken myth.
But we have to be responsible guides here. Who is this not for? Because 50 hours is a lot.
If you are looking for fast-paced, plot-driven action, this will drive you crazy. If you are the type of person who gets annoyed by 3 pages of poetry or slow world building, or if you just want the highlights, stick to the movies.
Or if you're looking for something to listen to while you're doing something that requires a lot of concentration, this might not be it.
Right. This is for the learner who wants depth. It's for the fantasy lover who wants to feel the texture of the world. It is for the person who is willing to sit by that fire we talked about at the beginning and let the storyteller take their time.
So here's where it gets really interesting for me. We've talked about this as a piece of entertainment, but I think it might be something more.
How so?
Well, think about that line about evil whispering, and think about the pacing that invites patience. We live in a world that's designed to be loud. It is designed to be fast. Constant notifications, constant outrage, 15-second videos.
It's a cacophony.
It is. And we are losing the ability to focus. We are losing the ability to sit still.
That's a valid fear.
So maybe the real value of plugging into Middle-earth for 50 hours isn't just escaping reality. Maybe it's a training course.
A training course in listening.
Exactly. It forces you to slow down. It forces you to pay attention to the nuance of a voice, to the rhythm of a song, to the quiet description of a leaf.
That is a profound way to look at it. It's recalibrating your attention span.
So here is the thought I want to leave you with today. We spend so much of our lives reacting to the loud things, the breaking news, the urgent emails, the shouting match on social media. But if the analysis of Tolkien is right and evil and maybe hope, too, comes in whispers, are we even trained to hear them anymore?
That is the question.
Maybe the next time you reach for your headphones, consider taking the long road. It might just help you hear the quiet things again, the whispers of danger, and the quiet endurance of hope that we usually miss because the rest of the world is screaming at us.
I couldn't agree more.
Something to mull over. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.